Hey, hey,
Okay, and
folks.
we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth event of the Solana Wormhole Hackathon. We have a really exciting guest today. We have Robert Leshner, who is the founder of Compound. He's going to be doing a 30-45 minute deep dive into all things Compound. There's been a lot of exciting things going on, and so him and Tully are just going to have a friendly chat about it all. Quick reminder, registrations for the Solana Wormhole Hackathon officially ended last night. And so hacking has officially commenced as of this morning, and will go until the 14th. So we're excited to see what everyone ends up building. And two quick notes: there's a chat tab where you can drop any public communications, and we also have a questions tab if you have any questions for Robert throughout the chat, and we'll take the last 10 minutes to answer them all for you. So I'm gonna jump off totally, and I'll leave it to you.
Cool. Awesome. Really good to connect with you, Robert. It's awesome to have you here. So, kind of like, do you want to give a brief background how you ended up in crypto and like how you started Compound?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have, always been, in my heart, a little bit of a, mix between a finance person and a builder. I started my career in finance working in interest rate markets and, had a lot of fun, learned a lot, got really into the math and science of all of that. And then along the way, sort of moved out to California and became, a traditional sort of venture-backed software founder. And always was observing crypto sort of from the sidelines. So, started looking at Bitcoin back in the day, did a little bit of mining in 2013, but never beyond just being a hobbyist. And then when Ethereum came out, it was sort of an aha moment for me because I said, oh, you can actually program assets and value. Now that's exciting to me. I like the idea of, a new currency that would compete with existing currencies, but the idea that you could have essentially like, a Turing complete programming, platform on a blockchain to route logic and assets and wealth was like mind blowing to me. And I said, I have to do this immediately. And so, immediately jumped in and basically, built what was missing in the space, in my opinion, and also what I knew, which was creating interest rate markets for crypto assets. This started in 2017. It was before the word DeFi was a word yet. Back then it was, hey, we can actually create, an entirely functioning financial market running on a blockchain. That's crazy. Let's see if it even works. When we started, we had no idea if it would even work. A lot of this was like completely untested. No one was really building entirely new financial markets, as executable autonomous code. And so, it's been quite the journey since. We've basically, been operating for 3 years, and we're here now with $2.5 billion of assets supplied to Compound.
Did you instantly think of it as a marketplace, as like a financial marketplace?
Yeah, we did. So, early on, from the very earliest moments, like, all right, well, how do you even build, a market on a blockchain? With that, well, we have to build the whole stack. We have to build a market. We have to build, an application. There's like, if you go all the way back, there was designs for like a mobile app to like access Compound with. And over time, very early in like 2017, we figured out like, oh, like the open nature of building on a blockchain means that we can just focus on like one specific piece, which is like creating a market and like making it accessible to other application developers and interfaces and like builders, and really narrow in on just doing like one thing extremely specifically and very simply, and that's just creating an interest rate market. And it wasn't intuitive at first. Like, day zero, we didn't get that. It took us like a couple of like months of like just like tinkering in the garage, to realize that was like possible.
That's super cool. Like I had like, I think similar like education. I as an engineer at Qualcomm, I like traded on the side, like, interactive broker style trading with an API, and never made like any money, just kind of but I was fascinated by like smart contracts platforms when Ethereum came out, because I thought that you could kind of like bolt NASDAQ on top of it. Like, didn't really think through all the implications of this until maybe like a year ago, where as we were building the system, you kind of start getting into the nitty gritty of it. How do the mechanics of the stuff actually works? And as you described, I think it's been pretty amazing for me to see how small pieces that are just a small thing, just a central limit order book, or just a lending market, or just an AMM, can now all function together.
Yeah, it's so cool to watch it all unfold. And like,
Yeah.
the research and discovery part, and like learning like the nuances of the blockchain, were like, the first 6 months to a year of what we were doing. Like now, in 2020, it's like there's starting to be like very common patterns of like how you build an application on blockchain. It's like there's shortcuts. It's like, oh, now everyone like has pools of assets, and like everyone is like using like this some shorthand techniques to like make a system work for thousands of users, as opposed to like iterating over individual like addresses or accounts, and like all these things, like using indices to track value. But like when we had to like learn all of this stuff in 2017, there was nothing like in the wild yet for us to learn from, right? Like, and so now like I envy like DeFi founders who are able to look at like this whole like spectrum of products that exist and say, okay, this is great, I like that, let me cherry pick the best pieces from all of these different things, as opposed to like inventing everything for the first time.
Yeah. This was also like, I think, people forget how early 2017 was for DeFi, because everybody was talking about store of value. That was like the only thing. And then stable coins were like just starting to come out. And I I was in this group, this DEX group on Telegram, and I was like, hey, Solana can kind of hit NASDAQ level speeds. I think we can actually run like a whole like thing there, do real price discovery. And like Kyle, like Multicoin, like our biggest investor, was like, DEXs are dead. Don't worry, don't focus on that. It's really funny.
Yeah. Well, now they're back. I mean,
yeah. Now I think like I just honestly believe that like if you have a system that can do state transitions as fast as the news, that's as fast as the market needs to be. And like these systems like can't achieve that speed. We can actually have open permissionless systems that have as good of a price as a centralized one. And that means that there's no need for these centralized services, for the most part, for the big use case.
Yeah. If it wasn't, going to be a DEX, what did he encourage you to, focus on instead as the first application?
He didn't have that much foresight, but that was his sentiment. And then I think the idea of a fast blockchain was intriguing in itself, that we could kind of our like kind of secret sauce. Like I think like these systems are really hard, and when you bet on solving 2 or 3 computer science problems, you're kind of aggregating risk. You're compounding the risk. Right? Like oops. Hey Austin, you're still there, right? Okay.
Oh, sorry, I actually clicked the button to maximize your screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. And like we got super lucky with a single solving a computer science problem just by sheer dumb luck. Was this like idea of using a clock outside of consensus, like actually constructing it, and the rest is just hard engineering problems. And I think that's why we've been fairly quick at building stuff and shipping it. But like when you have like more complicated systems where unknown computer science problems, it just becomes harder and harder to estimate when anything gets done. Do you like?
Clock, having a clock. I mean, it's such a hilariously simple example, but like,
yeah.
The amount of times that like we've struggled with like very basic blockchain primitive things so far have been like, oh, there's not a clock. It's sort of like a consensus for miners, like and it's like, well, how do you build like and measure interest rates over time in this specific nuance of how a blockchain actually operates, right? So that's what I love about sort of like going to like the most primitive level and like trying to unlock new functionality.
These are like hard problems, like almost philosophical to some extent. How do we as humans define time, right? Like we've built a bunch of oracles, right? Like based on the sun, position of the sun in the sky.
And science,
Yeah. Yeah, this has been like an interesting experience because I feel like we're taking the old world like and rebuilding it like much faster, right? Like even in like some ways like governance, we went through like 2000 years of governance evolution, I think, in blockchain in like a span of a decade.
Oh yeah, we went through like 20 years of R&D in like a very small amount of time. Like yeah, I'm just amazed at how much has happened in the last like 2 or 3 years in terms of just like knowledge about how this stuff works and seeing new use cases and applications. Like it feels like it's like a golden era, like that's beginning right now.
You guys, I think, have been a huge part of it. Not in the even just the use case itself that you're famous for, which is the interest rate, but I think on the governance side as well. Did you anticipate that being so important?
Sort of. So day zero, we basically had this vision where we said, okay, if you're going to build a financial market on a blockchain, the goal of it is that it sort of runs on its own forever. And we knew there was going to have to be this like giant leap between like starting off as like 6 engineers in an attic in like a building in San Francisco, like that's literally how we started. So like there's a financial market that just runs on its own forever, right? And we knew there was going to be this like gap between those two things. But early on, we just like waved our hands in the air. We're like, oh, one day there'll be like a DAO or something that like manages it. Like the very, very first versions of the white paper, like we're like, oh, we'll figure out how to have it run on its own. You're like, we'll discover and research and science all of that later. The more important thing is like getting out a proof of concept, seeing if it works, how it works, like how is it composable with other applications, like what happens next before making it permanent and like autonomous, like forever. So we knew it was extremely important. We just didn't know what it was supposed to look like or what it was supposed to be. And I actually think like at the end of the day, like the goal is just make it run forever, right? And like governance is just like one of the like words that gets used for like how do you make it sort of one upgradable so that it can improve, because like it's just completely hardened. It's not going to run forever. It's going to be obsoleted in like 2 years. So one is like, how does it improve? And the second is like, how can you make it so that it's essentially censorship resistant, or like one person or one party can't just like mess up the whole show, right? And like those are the two virtues. And like they both have to exist. And like we looked at Bitcoin as like a reference in a lot of ways, because like Bitcoin evolves, not quickly by any stretch of the imagination, but like it evolves, right? And at this point, it's completely hardened. And so, like we, looked at other systems where they could evolve extremely fast, but they weren't hardened at all. And there's this like trade-off and this like competition between these two virtues. And so, I think every like protocol or application or whatever needs to find its own like trade-off that it wants between like upgradability and no one can mess it up, and like it's not perfect. You can't have both like extremes completely. That's like I think technologically impossible at this moment, right? But we designed a governance process and system that we thought best achieved that for our specific application. And so I also don't think any of this is like one size fits all. What like works for one protocol or application isn't ideal for another protocol or application. What works for one blockchain isn't ideal for another blockchain, and like all these things. But I think we developed a lot of like early research that other teams can like learn from, and like again like cherry pick the best pieces from and like learn from, and like like apply them in new and interesting ways. So we basically have what I believe to be like a really good effort to make a system that's able to evolve, and one party can't just mess it up. Or many parties.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how open you guys are about like building and letting other people build, like with your research, right? I mean, that's really hard for like to balance that as a startup founder, where you're working your ass off in a dingy 500 startup office right, like on ramen, right? And then somebody uses your code. But it is, I think, humbling how quickly like the space flourishes because of that. Like it makes me feel like I'm a small piece, but in a very important system.
Yeah, and like I kind of like firmly believe in like some of the sort of like open source virtues, which is like one, the entire industry moving forward is good for both, Compound, the protocol, Compound engineers who originally built it, like all these things. Like if the whole industry moves forward, like that's a positive, like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Like,
Yeah.
like anything we can do to like help just the whole industry go up is like a good thing. Like even if like it doesn't necessarily directly add value to us, it might indirectly add value to us. Like, and the second is that like even as people like take some of the things we've built, like we, think that like, it's not going to actually harm us, right? Like we actually think that like, all right, like having more, people using the governance tooling and framework we built, I don't see how it really harms Compound. Even having direct forks of Compound, I don't like think harms Compound, right? It like draws attention back to like, the original in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And so, I'm a huge proponent of like sharing. I think there's a lot of other approaches you can take, but like I think just like, really making sort of research available, making code available, and doing all of these things is like extremely positive for everybody, and hopefully comes back to us in delightful ways.
That's awesome. I'm like so happy to see like open source ethos and projects actually win in the space over anyone that's building proprietary stuff. I don't even remember their names anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And like there will be, completely proprietary things that get built in this space. Like one of the scariest things is when like, we have a massive technological incumbent like Google and Apple, Facebook and Amazon that wants to create, a system like this. We're not going to have this like same openness, right? Like, and like at the stage we're at right now, I think like it's a completely different framework than when one of those incumbents is really trying to like compete against the ecosystem. So I am very curious to see how all this plays out. One of my core hypotheses is that like there's going to be development coming from massive technological incumbents over the next couple of years. We already see it. Some of the largest financial incumbents. We're starting to see it very quietly from some of the largest, tech incumbents. And so, it's possible, and I hope that the sort of like open source like community, builds tools that get the critical mass and scale and like integration to the point that they're not able to be disrupted. Otherwise, we might be left with like a lot of the virtues that brought so many people into the space, being co-opted. I'm very curious to watch how this unfolds.
Yeah, me too. I hope we don't have like, the Google Android being the de facto Linux. Right? Like that happening to the space would be really sad.
It's possible though. Like we're still so early that that's a very distinct possibility.
I think like some of the nuances on finance are, especially lending, are really tough to get. Like we kind of live in a world where we have this idea of like a credit score oracle that's fairly well trusted, right? Like a company can kind of use it and give me credit. And do you think that's going to be? A lot of people have tried this, right? Like chain, and it's just too hard. Is that problem due to adoption problem? Like they're just too early, or is it just impossible? Like in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's funny because like when we were building Compound, we looked again at the limitations of like what's possible on a blockchain, and we had to build a system that was like completely self-insulated and like insular, where it was like, all right, the system only relies on the data of the users that bring value into the system, period, right? And like we have to build something that works in that context. And so the system we designed was you can borrow, with an over-collateralized position. Why? We don't have to know anything about you. It's autonomous, it's instant, it's very easy to implement on a blockchain, but really there's no access to the outside world. And so everything we did from like, from the earliest stages of research, we had to rule out, using like, the reams of data that exist out there. And like credit decisions in the real world are now run with like massive amounts of data and information. I think at some point we might get like hybrids where like, outside of a blockchain, by the way, on any blockchain, storage is expensive, memory is expensive, like, everything is expensive, and like, even on Solana, on every blockchain, right? Relative to, you have massive, data centers and
Yeah.
servers, right? So I think at some point we might like wind up with these very interesting hybrids where, you have data centers with just unlimited amounts of information, able to like crank the best decisions, but that serve essentially as APIs to blockchain, right? And like we might see all of these things, and like we're going to see lots of experimentation and R&D. Like right now on chain, there's really just no good way to do anything that's not completely encapsulated in one system. So over collateralized borrowing is sort of a must for how Compound operates because each user brings all the value that's necessary into the protocol. But one day, we might see a system where something like Compound accesses information based on, terabytes of data
Well,
on chain.
I think like, have you guys thought? Did you ever have this thought? Like I had this recently. We're kind of watching Circle and some personalized tokens as an opportunity to build a marketplace for effectively my credit score. My personalized token, right? Right, is then can then be used without changing to Compound. I can collateralize that thing to borrow against ETH, and that is effectively over collateralized loans. But from your perspective, it's over collateralized, but from my perspective, it's fractional because I'm betting my reputation, so to speak. I think like there's some. Is that doable? Do you think? Do you think that'll like?
Absolutely, and like someone will like have like a fork of Compound one day that uses like personal tokens, right? And like, what are personal tokens? There's so far only like 10 of them, right? But like a number of people have just said, I'm going to tokenize myself in different ways. Some have said it's a share of future income. Some have said it's an hour of my time. Some have said, I don't know what this does yet, but here's my name as a token. You can buy it. And that would be like a very cool like shortcut to having credit on chain. The scalability of that I would question because like people are so unique and they each have to do their own tokens and there's like 10 people that have done that. But like that would be a really fun sort of like shortcut.
So if anyone's listening to this that wants to build something like that, it's be trivial to like issue a token in Solana to do that. And I think like my feeling of like was building a layer one is like taking these unscalable things and seeing what happens if we just allow them to scale to like 1 billion people, 100 million people, some absurd number, right? Like I think like a bunch of stuff will fall over, but the things that will succeed, I think, will be transformative to the rest of the world. Like it.
Absolutely. So, one of the reasons why I think DeFi, found, such like critical mass so early in product market fit on Ethereum was it doesn't matter that it's somewhat expensive and somewhat slow, right? It just doesn't matter. If you're doing financial transactions, whether it's trading or borrowing assets, if it takes 45 seconds and it costs you $3, compared to existing finance, that's like mind-boggling. That something can happen in 45 seconds and for $3, right? Like, because existing financial transactions are just like, in general, like for doing large trades or large, financial activity, just so slow and so expensive, right? But it crowds out like so many things that aren't worth, spending that much money on. Like games were one of the original ideas where it's like, oh, you put a game on a blockchain. It's like, not really, right? Like, like nobody would want to play a game where every interaction is like slow and expensive, right? So that's a use case that doesn't work when you are focusing on having something that's like, I would say like very, secure and expensive to, modify. So I think like changing that framework and saying, well, let's make things like, cheap and scalable. I think you're going to see entirely new use cases that just didn't exist. They don't fit, with that prior framework. And so I think you might still see like, a bunch of things like staying put because it works, when it, takes 45 seconds to $3. But, other things that just can't function in that can flourish.
Do you think, I guess this is kind of like, what are you predicting about the future, like the next couple of years? I can't possibly imagine the delta from 2017 to now. So I don't anything could happen, right?
Yeah, I think the delta from 2017 to 2020 is going to look similar to 2020 to 2023. I honestly think that in 3 years, the whole space could look radically different. When we define what is DeFi, you might have people saying like, "Oh, I'm going to use like, the JP Morgan compound," right? Well, I think that's likely in 3 years, right? I think you're going to start to see people plugging into like open, permissionless blockchains that you would just never expect. I think it's going to unfold extremely quickly. I think some of it's going to like displace existing players. I think some of it's going to 100x existing players. And I think it's, one of those things that like, it's unknown unknowns. Like I just know the world's going to be very different in 3 years. Just because like this has been such like fertile ground of like knowledge discovery. Like we didn't even know how things were supposed to work 3 years ago. Now we have glimmers of like, here's how you build like financial applications on a blockchain. And so I think now that we know, there's just so much hunger and curiosity from, governments, large companies, everything on down to individual developers that I think we're going to see a lot of new development.
Same. Like I agree with you. I think like we've kind of broken through a lot of the tech barriers. Like the last 2 years have been really massive for not just R&D, but like actual implementation of like kind of the bottlenecks. I think ourselves and our competitors have done a tremendous job in actually like shipping stuff and getting those ideas out to out live. So I think it's going to really accelerate in terms like every boom brings people into the space, and this new boom I think is bringing new people into the space, and now they have like all those crazy ideas. They now have all the tools to actually go execute on them, so they have more options than they need in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the next wave is going to be unbelievable.
Yeah. There's a question that I'm kind of interested, like that's on the board, like the breakdown between Compound, Uniswap, and QuickSwap, and like that composability. Like, is that part of your vision? Like, how do you guys view it as part of like you're planning on it? Like, is this like a roadmap thing? Like,
sorry, can you be more specific?
I guess like, are you guys building interfaces and tools that expand on composability? Like, or are you thinking more like insular, like we're adding compound features?
Yeah, so we're focused on really on compounds, knowing that the ecosystem itself builds composability in ways that we never could. So the thing that we're focused on is expanding the surface area of how many people are actually able to tweak compound the protocol. This financial market with $2 billion, like we're trying to increase how many different teams and developers are able to expand on it, knowing that some of them are going to just mash it up with Uniswap and mash it up with another system. And so we're really focused on just like enabling that expansion. So a lot of the governance tools that we built are so that community members or like other teams or other projects can like actually like propose and implement core changes to the way Compound works. And so we're kind of like focused on enabling the expansion as opposed to like building the expansion ourselves.
Got it. That's very similar to us, right? Like Wormhole, like this thing, it's a bridge built by a different team, by our community, and it bridges two networks. And to me, this is kind of like when you have two ecosystems, the bridges will be built. Like like somebody will go and do it simply because there's now like opportunity to move stuff across, right? It's almost like kind of happens on its own.
Yeah.
But we're definitely excited to like support these folks. One thing that I've been kind of thinking about too is like the protocols that are being built. There's often this kind of misconception that they're capital inefficient because of this over collateralization. But my theory is that since all these pieces are open, that the actual positions themselves are collateral, are valuable, right? Like if I deposit collateral and I get the token back, that token is fungible and tradable as well.
Yep.
Do you guys see that? Like, do you guys see that as a more accurate form of accounting than like a book at like, I don't know, Wells Fargo or something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. So it's funny because, we've had 3 versions of Compound so far. Version 0, which nobody ever got to play with. It was really just R&D. Version 1, which was like, it was a monolithic smart contract deployed on Ethereum, and it was very simple. It was, you can put a token into the box, or you can borrow a token from the box, once you've already supplied an asset, that's it. And in version 2, we increased the sort of programmability of the assets inside Compound by saying, when you have a balance inside the protocol, we give you a second token that represents your balance that you can transfer, that you can trade, that you can move into like cold storage, that you can do whatever you want with, so that you can easily move the balances inside the protocol. And, that on its own is like crazy. Like if you have a, bank account at JP Morgan, like you can't program your balance there, right? Like you can't move your balance there except like by using like very specific tools that they give you, right? But being able to like let any developer move the balances inside Compound, that alone was like one of like the sort of like massive inflection points and sort of like adoption and utility, where the actual core protocol does nothing different. Like it literally didn't change at all. All we said was, and once you have a balance inside of it, you can just move that balance. That's it. And I think that is just so powerful.
So I am like becoming religious about this idea because I feel like this is akin to like building small programs in Unix that operate through pipes, right?
Yeah.
Like if I put a token into a protocol, I want a token out, right? And that's reversible, right? And to me, like this paradigm, I think is like if you can design your protocols to match that, then you're kind of building, I think, robust and secure accounting systems, right? For like risk or something like that, for specific kinds of risk.
You are. I mean, and it's just funny that like a token standard became the way that people thought about this. Like it didn't even have to be like a token standard, right? But it's just a standard to say value in any system you want account for, you can track and you can move, right? / program, right? It doesn't have to be a token standard. Like we used, a token standard that already existed to represent balances inside Compound, and like it's becoming more of a thing that happens inside DeFi now. It's like, oh, you always put a token in, you get a token out. But it didn't have to be that. It could have been like an alternate standard where we could have said like, oh, there's a new set of like functions called, move or transfer balances inside.
Well, somebody would have wrapped him with a token. Somebody would have taken
the token. Yeah.
That's, I think the beauty of it is that like software, flattens all roads, right? Like as soon as you give an opportunity, it's doable. And it's absurd how slow traditional fintech has been moving to making that possible. It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's because like, traditional finance and traditional fintech like operates with extremely narrow innovations, right? Where you're taking one thing, you're partnering with all of the different existing incumbents that you have to partner with to get permission to use their systems, and you're making one very small and narrow iterative innovation on top of all of the other incumbents that exist. And you're oftentimes partnering with all of them and getting their permission to make a very small iterative improvement. And, the thing that I find like so massively powerful about everything happening in space right now is, one, don't need permission, and 2, the innovations are not small and iterative. And that's why you're seeing this like exponential liftoff in terms of what's happening in DeFi, is because you don't need permission, and permission takes a long time. So you can get to market in like days, not years. And the improvements aren't tiny incremental efficiency gains. They're reinventions across the board. And so the pace of progress in DeFi is just clearly exponential. And the pace of progress in fintech is extremely linear and very like lightly sloped. And like that is a powerful magnet, one, to draw in more adoption into the space, but two, to completely disrupt existing financial systems and incumbents. And I think, you know, the inflection point is already happening. Like the first 2 years of DeFi, everyone was like, this is so slow, it looks like this. And now everyone's like, this is crazy, it looks like this. You know, like growth is going off the charts.
Yeah.
But it's an exponential system as opposed to a linear.
Are you ever like lose sleep over the idea that there's a lot of like the recursive valuations of moving one token to another one and then stacking these smart contracts could a single bug could kind of bring the whole thing down.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is like an extremely important concept that like very few users in the space talk about or understand, and like there's far less attention paid to it than there was even in like the year ago DeFi or 2 years ago DeFi. You know, there's this concept of like low-level financial primitives and high-level financial products, okay? Compound is like a low-level financial primitive, right? Really, like once you get past the technical risks, right? And at this point, like with everything that's been done, like ideally the technical risks are understood to be extremely low. They're still non-zero, okay? Even at Compound, they're still non-zero, but they're extremely low. You know, it's proven out with like a shitload of audits as well as like the Lindy effect. But like right now, you can say the risk of a flaw in Compound is very small, still non-zero. Just like the risk of a flaw in Bitcoin is non-zero. It's very, very, very low and non-zero. It's a low-level system. It doesn't rely on really any other financial products or systems. You know, if something else goes down, likely Compound's completely unaffected. It's a very low-level system. But then you have products on top that compose Compound and another system. And when you do, you actually have an exponential increase in the risk. If you have a financial product that combines Compound and a trading tool and it's a new system, you have probably 3 times the technical risk right away. And you have 3 times the sort of like market risk right away. Your risk in like one level higher is probably like 9 times. Okay, I'm just gonna estimate. Back of the hand.
That's accurate.
It's 9 times riskier. You're 9 times more likely to lose your money by building a system that composes Compound and something else into a new product, right? We can even say it's an order of magnitude higher risk.
Yep.
Right? You then have systems that compose these other systems. It's probably an order of magnitude more risk. Every hop higher you go, you have 10 times the risk. And like in existing financial markets, people are very good at asking the questions about like, what are all of the risks packaged into this, right? And like, people are extremely aware of all of the risks and they map them out. Like, what are all the things that can go wrong all the way down the stack? In DeFi today, people are extremely bad at that. And it's one, because there's not that many like people that have seen a whole generation or a cycle of like screw ups, right? And two, like people like aren't trained yet to care about those risks or those problems because they haven't burned people enough times. But like in existing financial markets, you know, all of the return goes to the people who analyze risks the most carefully.
Yeah.
And that's not happening yet. So people don't understand the difference between like, you know, a low level system like Compound and like a system that's so high level that it composes like 15 other protocols and systems. And you're like, yeah, why would I want 4% of Compound when I can get 6% in this thing up here? And you're like oh my goodness. Like, buyer beware, man. Like, people are getting burnt, right? Like, you know, a few days ago, there was a system called Harvest over on the Ethereum blockchain. It was like, Harvest is like so high level in the stack that it's like, God, they composed a lot of different risks. And like users didn't care. They're like, I get 20% in Harvest versus 4% down here. And it's like, you're taking 100,000 times the risk. Right? And like, you know, and you saw it blow. And so, you know, this is going to happen until people as an ecosystem get trained to start asking this question, looking at it a certain way. Eventually, I think the market will sort of like either sort of like self-regulate. When I use that term self-regulate, I don't mean like with like trade associations and things like that. I mean like the industry will start to like, police itself and ask its own questions and be like, well, where does that return come from? Like, what are the crazy like gotchas that could exist and like the risks that could exist to get there? And I think
have you ever talked to Tarun? I mean that's his day job is modeling this stuff.
I talk to Tarun every day. So me and Tarun, we have a small investment fund together. So we actually
oh right, yeah.
we invest in projects in the space together. So we spend a lot of time asking all of the questions like what can go wrong? Like what don't users see yet? What doesn't the user see? And like, are they building a financial product or market that like actually makes sense to like deliver, value to people for a long time coming? And like a lot of the things in the space right now, people just don't know yet are deeply flawed.
Yeah, I think like we're gonna have basically like people running Monte Carlo simulations on these giant state machines and like trying to see where are the risk factors. And I think the world that we build will end up being much better and more responsive because of this like idea that everything's a token. Immediately start adjusting the risk on the market. If these markets are open and permissionless and these systems are like analyzable by engineers, it'll be a better world. Like I 100% believe that.
Absolutely. Like my personal hypothesis is that, over time, more and more of the systems are going to, whether you call it AI or machine learning, whatever, there's going to be like machine operated oversight and management and calibration of all financial products, right? And the glorious thing about building on a blockchain is that you're making an open system that can be fully machine operated, right? Like existing finance is run fundamentally with spreadsheets and contracts. That's extremely hard to machine operate something that's spreadsheets and contracts. And so it's going to be inefficient in decades, right? It's extremely easy to machine operate something that's like a computer program deployed on a blockchain. Like, that's like as ideal as it gets.
So I had this like, in the super early days, I was like brimming with vision, and I kind of saw these systems as like the only place where true general purpose AI could form is inside one of these chains. And us as like running the validators and doing and trading and like getting tokens in return, we're ants. We're not aware of the anthill, right? Of the intelligence of the anthill.
Right. I mean, it's crazy. Like we might be building a system, an infrastructure that's just more fundamentally ideal for more rapid evolution and iteration later, where like the operators of these financial markets are just going to be robots.
I guess let's look through some questions. There's some interesting ones popping up. I've asked one already. There's another one from Ben. Do you think about the future of Compound from a base layer chain approach? Like, are you thinking Ethereum, or are you thinking it's probably going to be Pareto efficient chains picking a certain use case and probably be Compound will work in multiple of them?
Yeah, so I think if Compound works on Ethereum, which for the record is expensive and somewhat slow, it can work anyway. And I think it works better than like a trading system. So on a trading system, slow is like a disaster. You don't want something that takes 45 seconds, right? But for like borrowing, you probably don't care if it takes you 45 seconds to borrow an asset or 45 seconds to begin earning interest. So Compound itself is one of the few applications I think has an extremely natural fit with Ethereum. I think it works phenomenally on it. And therefore, there's less of a need for another chain to be like the logic layer for this system. But another chain should absolutely be the logic layer if it's like, we need to have fast trading. That's like extremely like, low latency.
So like from my perspective, I kind of see like all smart contract platforms as fungible block space. It's just like some memory that people agree on. And it doesn't really matter if Compound is providing lending services on Ethereum because you can move those tokens through a bridge to Solana and then trade them and then move them back.
Exactly.
And nobody cares, right?
Yeah, settlement
Right.
layer I actually think works great on Compact.
Right.
As more bridges between like Ethereum and Solana, then like, you know, you kind of actually prefer that like the base settlement is like on the chain that's like, yeah, we know it's like extremely expensive and slow, and like we know that like it focuses on having a huge amount of like, you know, block certainty and finality. Like transactions, okay, you know, to port assets back and forth and run them in Compound. So I think it's going to naturally evolve as other chains sort of pop up. There's going to be more and more bridges between Ethereum and other chains, and I think it's going to naturally start to extend. Versus like, building something, you know, for the first time on a new blockchain, you know, I don't think, you know, you have the same value. So I see this sort of web evolving between Ethereum and Solana and other blockchains and Compound, following the trail of those, you know, wormholes and that web between chains.
So I think what else is what to me is also like somebody that's always thinking about optimizations is that these protocols provide almost like they can smooth away any kind of like technical complexity of dealing with like the underlying consensus. If you have like something that needs to wait, you know, for 90 seconds on Ethereum and Solana, you don't actually have to wait that. If I can issue a token and I can borrow from a pool on Compound, it can settle and repay my debt as soon as this bridge completes, right? But I can actually go start trading instantly. So then the interest I'm paying is this like 90-second like settlement time on like actually moving this thing over. And to me, like this stuff is complicated. It's going to compound the technical risk, but I think like, you know, software flattens all roads. And to me, like, I think there's a ton of opportunity to give people both a really super fast path and a really secure path where we're kind of reducing the real risks, right? Like collusion risk or intrusion risk and those kinds of things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, without a doubt. And, you know, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch sort of how it evolves. I mean, again, like, you know, I think it comes down to like, what is the natural use case being created? With Compound, you know, it's really like a fire and forget product. You're like, I'm going to supply an asset to Compound for 3 months. Like, I'm not going back for another 3 months.
Yep.
Right. And if you're going to be like using it for 3 months, like proactively, it doesn't matter whether you start at 12 o'clock p.m. or 12:01 p.m. Right. If your horizon for the position is 3 months, right? Or if you're borrowing for 3 weeks, right? But other systems where it's like market prices changing, if there's a trade that has to occur, the difference between 12 o'clock and 12:01 for like trading an asset is like night and day. And so I think it really comes down to like the innate nature of the product.
So are you thinking of like a hybrid approaches where you have like because the collateral and the borrowing is tied to some price, right? It's tied to some price feed. Like there is effectively a risk engine that kind of liquidates.
There is. So, and the risk engine allows the community to liquidate. So we basically create like a capitalist free market and like incentivize different actors to come in and just shop risk, which has always been super effective and we love. There is. And the reason though why, you know, the system works the way we've designed it is because we assume that it might take minutes or even an hour if something goes horribly wrong for a price to be like updated, right? And so the system relies on like significant excess collateralization. We say, all right, well, you have to have an extra 20% value, right? Because how long does it take for someone to liquidate you? It might take the amount of time it takes for an asset to drop 20%. It could be an hour, it could be a day, right? And so it relies on the assumption that things aren't instant. If you have this instant, you know, assumption, instead of requiring an extra 20%, you might require an extra like 10%. But you would still have like, you know, a conservatism in how you allow people to interact with the platform.
Cool. And this is where I think like it would be interesting to see if it's possible to design the risk engine running on a faster portion and the settlement occurring back on Compound. And I think that's totally doable. You know, in effect, like bridges provide not just token transfers, but RPCs, right? Hey, did this thing happen remotely? Cool. Like, I guess. Do you see any other questions on there that seem interesting to you?
I've not been looking at the questions.
Oh
but
yeah.
Follow
Okay.
up. Final, most
what
interesting.
what projects or protocols are you most excited about?
That's a great question. I have been spending a lot less time thinking about things that are not Compound lately, but the things that are most exciting to me are actually in the AMM space. So right now we're sort of in this like quasi renaissance of ideas about how to make efficient automated market makers exist. Whether it's on Ethereum or Solana or anywhere, I think we're entering this like really exciting sort of like discovery and research phase of like the industry where, you know, for better or for worse, most of the trading on most of the existing exchanges is done by automated market makers. It's just software that is trained to make markets, to buy and sell at different prices based on different logics and conditions, right? All the market making in the world today is automated. It's no longer dude waiting paper, right? All market making is automated, right? And we're evolving from like these very simple approaches and methodologies of automatically making a market by being like, oh, just throw a ton of capital into a bucket and like there's a formula by which it's always going to buy or sell.
And ignore the arb losses, right?
Yeah, there's more intelligent approaches to programmatically be willing to buy and sell an asset. So I'm like deeply excited about all the different experiments. By the way, there's like hundreds of experiments right now of like, how do you have a market being made on a blockchain through software, right? There's like so many things that go into that umbrella. But like, I think that's really probably for the next like couple years, the most interesting corner of the space for innovation to occur. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation that occurs there.
I'm really excited about that too, and I guess this is me like being very bullish about Solana because I think like the Serum spot market is the kind of information that is extremely valuable to compute an AMM that can actually like get rid of some of the current inefficiencies. Like the fact that like you have like Alameda and Jump creating that book means that they ran their risk engines and they're giving you this information for free in a now securely atomic box, right? That you can like read. And this to me is like I think the huge advantage of like a hybrid, these like hybrid states that can be composed against each other.
Yeah.
And this isn't like AMMs versus clubs. I think this is actually both like complementary because I think an AMM in the same system allows investors to kind of blindly click next and deposit their like value into something that is passive, right? Like it's passive income effectively, but they're leveraging this like other system that's like dynamic and with a very sophisticated risk engine that can take a hedge position on Serum and Binance, right? You can't do that from inside the box. But like leveraging that I think is massively valuable, and it's beneficial for both because now you have more depth, right? The market now is deeper, right? And that's good for everybody.
Yeah.
So like to me, this is like the coolest thing. Like composing both of these worlds together is now possible.
It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. Cool. On that note, I think we're at our like 5 minutes out. I don't know if there's anything else you want to like. Is there anything upcoming that you want to share about Compound?
Yeah, so I don't leak alpha, so nothing to share. But I will say I'm always excited by things happening in the space. I try to be open to chat with pretty much any founder, any team. If you're working on something super cool, just hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Telegram. Would love to just sort of like learn about what you're building and see if I can be helpful as somebody active in the space. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm always willing to be a sounding board for new ideas.
That's I would honestly, if you're listening, take Robert up on that because him and Tarun are probably one of the smartest people I've met.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. This has been awesome. It's been a real pleasure.
Cool. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, totally. That was awesome. For everyone watching, this will be up on YouTube tonight. and we have one other event at 3 p.m. PST, which is a future of DeFi discussion. So I'll leave a link for that here. I think everyone's good to go. It was a pleasure, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.
Bye,
All right,
everyone.
take care.